The courtroom was so quiet you could hear a paperclip drop. Every eye was locked on her. At the front of the courtroom, two uniformed cops leaned over to each other, snickering loud enough for the entire room to hear. One of them, a tall man with a thick Boston accent, said under his breath, but not quiet enough, "She probably thinks she's somebody with that suit on. Look at her, trying to act like she's not just another angry black woman." The other officer chuckled and added, "Yeah, probably in here for shoplifting or disturbing the peace. You know how they do." She didn't flinch. She sat there with her back straight, hands folded in her lap, her short, natural hair brushed neatly back, and a calm, unreadable look on her face. Her name was Jordan Miles. The judge hadn't arrived yet, and the room buzzed with the usual pre-courtroom mumblings. But now, everything felt frozen, like time had paused to make sure every word those officers said echoed long and sharp across the walls. Then, without warning, the court officer walked in from the back, approached the bench, whispered something to the court clerk, and pointed straight at Jordan. Suddenly, the same two cops who had been mocking her were now fidgeting, shifting in their seats. The clerk tapped the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin today's docket, we ask everyone to please rise for a brief address by the Director of National Civil Security." All heads turned toward Jordan. She stood up, adjusted her blazer, and walked toward the front of the courtroom. The two cops' mouths dropped open. The room went dead silent. Then, cliffhanger. Two more officers suddenly rushed through the courtroom doors, whispering urgently to the judge. The judge's eyes grew wide. Whatever they just said shook the entire room. Everyone turned to look at Jordan again, this time not with judgment, but with fear, curiosity, and awe. Now, let's go back to where this story began. Jordan Miles grew up in Richmond, Virginia, on a quiet street lined with oak trees and tiny front porches. Her mom was a librarian, her dad a history teacher. From the time she was little, she learned to speak with respect, think before acting, and stand up when someone tried to put her down. But it wasn't easy. The world she grew up in didn't always give black girls like her the space to be smart without being called bossy, or strong without being seen as aggressive. Still, Jordan learned how to carry herself with grace and quiet power, like her mama taught her. She got straight A's in school, skipped a grade, and earned a scholarship to Howard University by the time she was 16. By 24, she had 2 degrees, one in law and another in criminal justice. She didn't come from money, didn't know people in high places, but she had a dream. She wanted to change the way civil protection worked in America. She worked her way up through government programs, starting at the bottom. She worked as a civil rights analyst, then a supervisor in the Civil Oversight Bureau. She wrote reports, led reforms, and by 32, Jordan was appointed to lead one of the most powerful new departments in the nation, National Civil Security, a division formed to stop abuse of power and protect the rights of all citizens, especially those often ignored. But Jordan never flaunted her position. She wasn't about suits and spotlight. She believed in letting her work speak. That's why, the morning she walked into that courtroom, no one recognized her. She wasn't wearing a badge. She didn't come with a guard. She came as a citizen, there for a hearing about a civil case against 2 police officers who had been accused of racial profiling and unlawful arrest. What Jordan saw in the report had made her sick. A single mother yanked from her car in front of her children because the officers felt suspicious of her presence in a wealthy neighborhood. The officers had laughed about it in their body cam footage. And now, as she sat in that courtroom, those very officers were sitting just a few feet away from her, mocking her without knowing who she was. Jordan had requested to be there quietly. No title, no special entrance. She wanted to observe the court like any regular citizen. She needed to see it from the inside, how the system treated people who looked like her. But the whispers, the laughter, the way one officer pretended to mimic her walk to his buddy when she had stepped in. They didn't know her name, didn't care. She was just a black woman in a nice suit, as one had mumbled. Jordan watched the other people in the room too, how no one corrected the officers, how the staff behind the bench kept their heads down. She thought about all the times this kind of thing had happened before, to others. Some poor young woman, just trying to speak up, laughed at or belittled until she backed down. But Jordan wasn't backing down. She leaned over to her assistant, who was sitting behind her, and said quietly, "When the judge comes in, let him know I have something to say before proceedings begin." A few minutes later, those two officers were still giggling, poking fun, whispering, until the court clerk walked in, until the room rose, until Jordan stood up. And just when it seemed like that would be the most shocking moment of the day, an alarm went off in the hallway. Two uniformed men sprinted into the courtroom, their faces tight with urgency. One leaned into the judge's ear. The judge blinked, then turned slowly, eyes wide, and looked straight at Jordan. The judge nodded. Jordan walked calmly to the bench as the whole courtroom watched. The officers who had laughed before, now frozen, pale, eyes wide. The court clerk said something into the mic, something that changed everything in the room. And just as Jordan was about to speak, the courtroom doors burst open again. Someone ran in, breathing hard, holding something in their hand. The judge stood from his seat, face pale as chalk. Everyone turned in their chairs. And then, the man who had burst into the courtroom held a slim black folder in his hand. His suit was wrinkled, his forehead glistening with sweat, and he looked like he'd sprinted through the entire courthouse just to get there. He rushed straight up to the judge, whispered something urgent, and handed over the folder. The judge's fingers trembled as he opened it. The entire courtroom held its breath. Even the officers, who had just minutes ago been full of smugness and laughter, were sitting up stiffly now, like schoolboys who suddenly realized the principal had walked in. Jordan didn't move. She just stood there, eyes calm, back straight, watching. The judge read the papers, his face draining of color, and then looked back at the room like he was seeing it with new eyes. I believe there's been a misunderstanding, he finally said, voice shaky. Ms. Miles, or should I say, Director Miles, please, you have the floor. A wave of confusion hit the room. Director? Did he say Director Miles? People murmured. The air shifted. The officers blinked hard, like they were trying to reset their own memories. One of them, Officer Reynolds, swallowed loud enough to hear. Jordan walked to the center of the room, heels clicking softly on the tile. She turned slowly, facing the judge, then the attorneys, and then the gallery. My name, she began, voice steady, clear, is Jordan Miles. I am the sitting director of National Civil Security. Some of you may not have heard that name before, but I assure you, you will. Gasps echoed around the room. She turned her eyes toward the officers, Reynolds and Blake, the two who had mocked her the moment she walked in. They didn't know who I was when I arrived today, she said, voice calm. They didn't care. What they saw was a black woman in a suit. And what they assumed was that I didn't belong here, that I was the accused, that I must be a problem. The silence in the room was deep. She held her head high, staring directly at the officers. But I came today not to make a scene. I came to witness what justice looks like for everyday Americans, black women, single mothers, regular citizens who trust that when they enter a courtroom, they will be treated with dignity. No one moved. No one breathed. And just as Jordan took a breath to continue, Officer Blake shot to his feet. This is a setup, he yelled. You can't do this. You came in here undercover, tricked us into. The judge slammed his gavel. Sit down, Officer Blake. But Blake wasn't finished. You're trying to humiliate us. This is reverse racism. He was silenced instantly when two federal officers entered the courtroom from the side door. They weren't in city uniforms. These were DHS agents, Department of Homeland Security. Everyone knew it just from the way they moved. They came straight toward the officers. Officer Blake sat back down, but the color had drained from his face. Jordan didn't say another word. She didn't need to. The room now saw her. Not just her title, but the full weight of who she was and why she came. But let's rewind a bit. Go back to the start of the day before. Jordan had been sitting in her office in D.C., the giant glass windows behind her showing the sun rising over the Washington Monument. Her desk was tidy, laptop open, case files spread neatly in a row. The walls were lined with framed legislation, historic marches, and a photo of her standing beside a previous president, smiling, proud. Her assistant, Tasha, stepped in holding a file with a red stamp on it, urgent. It's the case from Richmond, Tasha said, setting it down. You need to see this. Jordan opened the folder and began reading. Page after page detailed the arrest of a black woman named Kiera Thompson. She'd been driving her kids home from a birthday party in a mostly white suburb. Officers had pulled her over, claimed she matched a vague description. No drugs, no weapons, no crime, just a hunch. Jordan's stomach turned when she saw the body cam transcripts. Can't wait to see how mad she gets. She got that look. Let's bet on how fast she starts yelling. Jordan closed the folder. I'm going to Richmond. Tasha blinked. You want me to call ahead? No, Jordan said. I don't want anyone to know I'm coming. That's how she ended up in that courtroom, walking in as just another citizen. No badge, no motorcade, just her suit, and a heart full of fire. And yet, despite the strength she carried, that day had started off quiet, even frustrating. She'd arrived at the courthouse early, only to be ignored at security while the officers gave their attention to a white lawyer who came in behind her. They barely looked at her ID, didn't even wish her good morning. Inside the building, she had to ask for directions 3 times because no one assumed she might be a lawyer or someone with purpose. But none of that shook her. Jordan had grown up knowing the unspoken rules. She knew how some people saw her before she even said a word. But what they didn't know, what couldn't be seen at first glance, was just how much power she carried. So she sat in that courtroom, listening, watching, until the moment came to speak. But now, back in that same courtroom, chaos was unfolding. After Officer Blake's outburst and the DHS agent's sudden arrival, everyone was scrambling. The judge called for a recess, slamming the gavel. 15-minute break. This court will reconvene with updated orders. Jordan stepped aside as the attorneys rushed to whisper with their clients. The media, who hadn't paid attention when she walked in, were now scrambling to find out who she was. Phones were buzzing. Reporters peeking in from the hallway were snapping pictures through the open doors. Jordan stepped out into the hallway with Tasha, who had quietly followed the whole time. Tasha whispered, "What now?" Jordan didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out the window at the parking lot, where a group of young black girls were walking by, laughing, holding lunch bags, on a school field trip. One of them glanced inside, saw Jordan through the glass, and stopped. She stared for a moment, then smiled. Jordan smiled back. Now she turned to Tasha and said, "Now, we make this bigger than just a courtroom." But before she could explain what she meant, a man came jogging up the hallway toward her, his eyes wide, a phone in his hand. "Director Miles," he said, out of breath. "You're going to want to see this." He held up the screen, and what Jordan saw made her freeze. A video had just gone viral, over 50,000 views in 10 minutes. A clip from inside the courtroom. Someone had been recording the officers mocking her. It had just hit the internet, and it was spreading like wildfire. Jordan looked up, eyes blazing. This wasn't just a courtroom matter anymore. It was national now. The video was only 37 seconds long. The screen showed Officer Reynolds leaning toward Blake with that crooked smirk, whispering, "She probably thinks she's somebody with that suit on. Look at her, trying to act like she's not just another angry black woman." Then Blake added, chuckling, "Yeah, probably in here for shoplifting or disturbing the peace. You know how they do." The clip ended right as the court clerk announced, "Please rise for the Director of National Civil Security." Cut. Boom. Instant uproar. The video had been posted by a teenage intern who'd been shadowing a local civil rights lawyer. She had uploaded it to X, formerly Twitter, captioned, "Two cops mocking a black woman in court. Not knowing she's the head of National Civil Security, this is wild." In less than 10 minutes, it had been picked up by a news blog. Celebrities were retweeting it. Civil rights groups were tagging their legal teams. People in offices and schools across the country were stopping in their tracks to watch it. Even news stations were breaking their coverage with, "This just in." Jordan stared at the screen. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her shoulders. Tasha, standing beside her, was already getting flooded with calls. Her phone buzzed nonstop. MSNBC wants a statement. CNN just requested a live interview. White House is asking for an update. But Jordan held up a hand. Not yet. She took a deep breath, then turned and walked back into the courtroom. The 15-minute recess was almost up. As she stepped through the doorway, every head turned. Not in mockery this time. Not in dismissal. Now, they looked at her like she was a storm walking on 2 legs. Even the judge stood when she entered, which he wasn't required to do. Jordan took her seat quietly, folding her hands again. She hadn't said a word about the video, and that silence made everyone even more nervous. Back on the other side of the room, Officer Reynolds looked like a balloon losing air. He was pale, sweating, gripping the table so hard his knuckles were white. His lawyer whispered something sharp to him, but he barely nodded. Blake wasn't even trying to hide his panic. He kept glancing at the door like he wanted to bolt. The judge returned to the bench, face grim. He cleared his throat. This court has just been made aware of a video involving two of the defendants in this case, making highly inappropriate and prejudicial remarks prior to the start of this morning's hearing. There it was. The moment. The public confirmation. I will be filing a motion for judicial review of these officers' conduct immediately following today's proceedings. In the meantime, both defendants are to remain silent unless spoken to directly. Is that understood? Both men nodded like children being scolded. But the worst part? The courtroom wasn't the only place erupting. Outside, down on the courthouse steps, a crowd had started to gather. News vans were rolling up with their antennas raised. Protesters were holding signs, some handwritten, others printed overnight like someone had them ready for just this kind of moment. We are not your joke. Power has a new face. Protect black women. Inside, the case continued. Kiera Thompson's lawyer stood up to present the evidence. Jordan stayed silent, simply observing, as she had planned all along. But the air had changed. The officer's smugness was gone. Now it was fear, regret, exposure. Kiera sat a few rows behind Jordan. She clutched her purse tightly, her eyes watery. She hadn't spoken to Jordan directly, but when their eyes met, Jordan gave her a quiet nod. Kiera nodded back, her lips trembling with a thank you she couldn't say out loud. The attorney played the body cam footage. The jury winced. Everyone heard the officers laughing as they yanked Kiera from her car. Her kids screaming. Her yelling, "I didn't do anything. My babies are in the back seat." And over that, Officer Blake's voice. Yeah, we've heard it before. Let's not make a scene." The courtroom was no longer just a courtroom. It was a mirror being held up to the entire nation. And Jordan, by simply sitting in silence, had become the image inside that mirror. But the calm didn't last long. Just as the lawyer finished her presentation, and just before the judge could call for a lunch break, the door to the courtroom creaked open. A woman in a tan suit entered. She was tall, had a sharp bob haircut, and wore a DHS badge around her neck. She walked briskly to the judge's bench and handed him a sealed envelope. The judge opened it. "Read." And his face shifted again. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said slowly, "we are being informed that this case may be affected by a developing federal investigation. I've been instructed to pause proceedings until clarification is given. We will break until further notice." He slammed the gavel. Gasps. Murmurs. Whispers. Jordan stood. Her face didn't change, but Tasha saw it. Jordan knew exactly what that meant. It was happening faster than even she had planned. She exited the courtroom to find the hallway even more crowded now. Reporters were shouting questions. "Director Miles, did you know the officers would act that way? Do you believe this is systemic? What message are you sending to America right now?" Jordan raised her hand. "I'll speak, but not here." She pushed open the side exit and stepped out into the sunlight, and that's when she saw it. The crowd outside had grown. Hundreds of people, signs, cameras, news anchors speaking live. And then a young black girl stepped forward from the crowd, maybe 10 years old. She was holding a sign made of cardboard and paint. "I want to grow up and be like her." The girl didn't say anything. She just stood there, eyes wide. Jordan walked up to her, knelt down, and asked softly, "What's your name?" "Imani," the girl whispered. Jordan smiled. "That's a strong name." Imani smiled back. Jordan stood, facing the crowd. Her voice rang out clear and strong. "I didn't come to Richmond for cameras. I didn't come for headlines. I came because what happened to Kiera Thompson has happened to too many for too long. What I saw in that courtroom today is exactly why I do this work." Cheers erupted. Flashes went off. And then, a black SUV screeched to a stop near the courthouse steps. The back door opened. Two men in suits jumped out. One of them walked quickly up to Jordan, whispered into her ear. Jordan's eyes narrowed. Then she turned to Tasha and said quietly, "Cancel everything. We need to go. Now." Tasha blinked. "What is it?" Jordan looked past the cameras, back toward the courthouse, and said just one word. "Leak." The moment Jordan said the word leak, it was like the temperature around her dropped 10 degrees. Tasha's face went stiff. "A leak? Where?" Jordan didn't answer right away. Her eyes scanned the crowd, then the courthouse, then the building across the street with its tinted windows and rooftop cameras. Something was off. Way off. The man in the black suit who had whispered in her ear was already back in the SUV. engine running, door open, waiting. She turned sharply and walked toward the vehicle. Tasha hurried behind her. Jordan, what kind of leak are we talking about? What got out? Jordan slid into the back seat of the SUV. I don't know yet. But if it's what I think it is, it's going to get ugly before it gets better. As the SUV peeled away from the courthouse, the sound of chanting from the crowd still echoed behind them. Inside the vehicle, Jordan pulled out her encrypted phone, tapped into a secure app, and entered a passcode that only she knew. Within seconds, a video began playing. It was grainy, clearly recorded in secret. It showed a dim office room, a whiteboard in the background, and 4 officers in plain clothes. One of them was Reynolds. The others weren't from the courtroom today, but they were part of the same department. Jordan's heart sank. The men were laughing. Make sure if she comes in, we let her feel it first, one of them said. You mean Director Miles? Nah, not as director. As just another black woman walking into a system built to break her. The others laughed. Reynolds spoke next. I don't care if she's the president herself. We've been doing this job longer than she's been alive. She ain't changing anything. Jordan paused the video. Her hands curled into fists. Tasha, she said quietly. This wasn't a random incident. This was a setup. Tasha's jaw clenched. They knew you were coming. They suspected. Someone inside DHS tipped them off I was reviewing the Thompson case. I thought we had a clean channel, but now I'm not sure. So what do we do now? Tasha asked, the nerves starting to show in her voice. Jordan looked out the tinted window as the SUV turned off the main road, heading toward a federal building downtown. We don't play defense, she said. We take the gloves off. The SUV pulled into an underground garage, and 2 armed guards waved them through. Once inside, they took a private elevator up to a sealed conference room in the National Civil Security Satellite Office. A team was already waiting for her. 6 people, mixed backgrounds, specialists in internal investigations, cyber tracking, and law enforcement conduct. We've got a mole, Jordan announced, dropping the phone onto the table and hitting play on the leaked video. Nobody spoke while the video played. When it ended, one agent, a woman named Ramirez, breathed out, Jesus. Jordan nodded. We need names. Access logs. Phone records. Anyone who pulled files on me or the Thompson case in the last 30 days. Ramirez was already tapping into her laptop. I'll need 3 hours. You've got 2, Jordan said. Whoever did this isn't just mocking my skin. They're mocking the system. And I won't let that slide. As the team got to work, Jordan walked into the adjacent glass office, closed the door behind her, and finally let herself feel the weight of it all. Not just the video, not just the courtroom, but the pattern. For years she had pushed from the inside, working the system, trusting the process. And still, this was what it came down to. Power laughing at justice like it was a joke. But Jordan wasn't a joke. She was a storm waiting for the right place to land. Her phone buzzed again. Tasha had forwarded a message to her private line. A voice memo. From someone she hadn't spoken to in months. She tapped play. Jordan, it's Marshall Hayes. You need to hear this. It's about the case. About one of the officers. I think you were right. But it's worse than you thought. Click. No details. Just that haunting message. Marshall Hayes was an old ally, former civil rights lawyer turned journalist. He wouldn't call unless it was real. Jordan stared out the window, thinking. She didn't even get a moment to breathe before Ramirez knocked on the glass door. We found something. Jordan followed her back into the war room. We traced the source of the leak to a data share from an IP address inside DHS's Richmond office. But the strange part is, Ramirez paused. The login came from a supervisor's terminal. And that supervisor? He was put on temporary leave 2 weeks ago. Jordan raised an eyebrow. So someone used his login? Or he never left? Ramirez clicked her keyboard and brought up a staff photo. Jordan leaned in. Her stomach dropped. It was a man named Curtis Langston. She recognized him instantly. Because he was in the courtroom today. Not in uniform. Not sitting with the officers. He had been in the back row, pretending to be part of the public gallery. Jordan whispered, he's the leak. He's more than that, Ramirez said. Look what we pulled from his phone. He's been sending daily updates to a private group, thread, code name Iron Circle. We don't know who's in it yet, but they've been targeting specific civil rights investigations for months. Yours is just the latest. Jordan stared at the screen. The Iron Circle, a shadow network operating inside the justice system. And now she was their target. Tasha, who had been listening quietly in the corner, finally said, "We need to warn Kiera." Jordan nodded. "And every other civilian involved in one of these cases. They might not just be trying to humiliate me. They might be trying to make someone disappear." She grabbed her coat and turned to the team. "Lock down every officer tied to the Thompson arrest. Start watching their movements. If they try to run, I want to know before they even buy a bus ticket." She turned to Tasha. "And find Marshall. Tell him I'm coming to him in person." Then, just as she was heading for the elevator, her phone buzzed again. It was a new message. No number, just a video file. She hesitated, then hit play. The screen flickered. Then came a voice. A man's. Distorted, but clear. "You should have stayed in Washington, Director Miles. You were never going to win this. We own the courts. We own the cops. We even own your staff." Jordan froze. The video ended. Her face hardened. She looked at Tasha. "Tasha, run a sweep on everyone in my department." Tasha's eyes widened. "You think someone on the inside?" "I don't think," Jordan said, stepping into the elevator. "I know." As the doors slid shut, her voice echoed. "They just made this war personal." The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, but it felt like thunder inside Jordan's chest. She stepped out into the underground parking lot, the concrete walls closing in like they were holding secrets. The air smelled of oil and tension. Tasha stayed close behind, her phone glowing with data streams, her face pale. "They said they own your staff," Tasha whispered. "Who do you think they meant?" Jordan didn't respond. Not yet. Her mind was already sorting through the faces in her office. People she trusted, some she'd hired herself. Could one of them have turned? Could someone have been feeding the Iron Circle information from inside her inner circle? It didn't matter who it was right now. All that mattered was this. Someone had betrayed her. They reached the black SUV, and Jordan turned to Tasha just before climbing in. "Call Kiera. Don't tell her what we know. Just make sure she's not alone. Then send a full list of every civil case we're overseeing. Start cross-referencing all court personnel, judges, clerks, bailiffs, cops. If their names show up more than once, I want a file on my desk." Tasha nodded and ran back toward the elevator as Jordan climbed into the car. "Drive to Station 49, she told the driver. The man gave a quick nod. "Yes, Director." Station 49 wasn't listed on any maps. It looked like an old fire station from the outside, but inside it was one of the few classified federal data vaults that still operated completely offline. No Wi-Fi, no cloud, just wires, paper, and bulletproof silence. Jordan had something she needed to retrieve, something she hadn't touched in years. As the SUV moved through the streets of Richmond, she glanced out the window. Protesters were still gathered around the courthouse. News anchors stood under umbrellas with microphones in their hands. It wasn't just a case anymore. It was a movement, and it had a face now, hers. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. A new message. Block number again. This time, no video. Just one line. "You won't make it to Station 49. Jordan's blood went cold. She leaned forward. "Change route. Now." The driver didn't respond. Jordan's heart jumped. "Agent Brooks, change route." Still nothing. Jordan leaned farther, getting a better look at the man behind the wheel. And then it hit her. It wasn't Agent Brooks. The man was wearing his suit, yes. But Jordan had memorized Brooks' build, his posture, even the scar on his left hand. This man was close, but not perfect. She reached for the handle of the door, and in one smooth motion, she slammed her elbow against the partition between her and the driver. "Who are you?" The car swerved violently to the right, nearly hitting a stop sign. Jordan gritted her teeth and yanked the door handle. Locked. The driver pulled a gun from under his jacket, pointing it backward through the small window in the partition. "Don't." But Jordan was already moving. She kicked at the reinforced glass. Not once, not twice, but 3 sharp hits, right at the weak corner. It cracked. The driver yelled and slammed on the brakes. Jordan crashed forward, caught herself, and rammed her shoulder into the door with everything she had. It clicked. She flew out of the SUV and hit the pavement hard. Tires squealed behind her. People on the sidewalk screamed. Jordan scrambled to her feet, sprinting into the alley just as the fake driver opened his door and stepped out, gun drawn. She ducked behind a dumpster, heart hammering, breathing sharp. She fumbled for her secondary phone. The burner. It was always turned off. She powered it up and dialed one number. Marshall Hayes answered after the first ring. "Jordan, I need you to send a car." Unmarked. Alley behind 9th and Wallace. Are you? Now, Marshall. He didn't ask more questions. He just said, on it. Jordan looked down at her hands. Scraped. Bleeding. But steady. The man in the fake Brooks uniform walked past the dumpster slowly, scanning the shadows, gun out. Jordan reached into her blazer and quietly unsnapped the holster under her arm. She never carried unless she was off the books. Today, she was very off the books. Her fingers gripped the cool metal. Footsteps. Closer. Closer. She waited until she could see his shoes. Black tactical boots. Then, a horn blared from the other side of the alley. The man spun toward it. Jordan lunged. She tackled him from behind, slamming him into the wall. The gun flew from his hand. He elbowed her in the ribs. She grunted but didn't back off. He turned, swung. She ducked, then punched him in the gut, hard. He gasped and stumbled. A second horn. Then tires screeched again. A silver Camry whipped into the alley, door open. Marshall Hayes leaned out. Jordan, get in. She sprinted, dove into the back seat, and slammed the door shut. The car peeled off just as the man reached for the weapon on the ground. Too late. They were gone. Inside the car, Jordan gasped for breath. Marshall looked back through the rearview. What the hell happened? Jordan sat up, pulled out her burner phone, and started typing. I was intercepted. Someone on the inside. They're not just watching me. They're trying to erase me. Marshall's hands tightened on the wheel. You still want to go to Station 49? Jordan nodded. Yes, but not to pull data. Not anymore. Then why? She looked at him, eyes sharp and dark. To pull names. Marshall blinked. Names. Jordan leaned closer. The Iron Circle isn't just some rogue unit. It's a network. Across states. Departments. Agencies. I've suspected it for years. But I could never prove it. Until now. She opened a small pouch in her purse. Inside, a key. Heavy. Old. Brass. Marshall's eyes widened. No way. That's the master key for the confidential roster safe. Jordan nodded. The original one. Never digitized. Only 2 people ever held this key. The founding director and me. Marshall whistled. And you think their names are in there? I don't think, she said, voice steady. I know. He grinned, but it was nervous. You sure you're ready for what you'll find? Jordan looked out the window as the city blurred by, her ribs aching, her lips swollen. She whispered, I've been ready since the day they mocked me in my own courtroom. And just as they turned the corner toward Station 49, a deep boom rocked the ground. Smoke rose in the distance. Jordan's eyes widened. It was coming from the direction of Station 49. Tasha's voice crackled over the burner phone just then. Jordan, don't go to Station 49. They've hit it. I repeat, they blew it up. Jordan stared out the window, watching the dark cloud climb into the sky. They're erasing everything, she whispered. Every trail. Every proof. And then her phone buzzed again. A new text. From an unknown number. You're too late. You should have stayed invisible. Jordan's lips pressed into a hard line. No, she said out loud, her voice like steel. You should have stayed in the dark. She looked at Marshall. We're going public. The smoke was thick and black, curling into the sky like a warning from the heavens. From the back seat of the Camry, Jordan watched the billowing cloud rise above Station 49, her safe house, her archive, her last private place untouched by digital footprints. Gone. Just like that. Marshall sped away from the explosion, turning onto a back road that led toward the outskirts of Richmond. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The only sounds were the racing engine and the faint wail of sirens moving toward the scene they had just escaped. Jordan's phone buzzed again. Another message. Same blocked number. Smoke clears. You'll be ashes. She clenched the phone so hard her knuckles turned white. They're not just erasing records. They're making a move on me. Physically. Marshall finally broke the silence. This is war now. You understand that, right? Jordan looked at him. It's always been war. They just stopped pretending it wasn't. She leaned forward, her mind running through options. Station 49 had been the last place housing the physical roster of Iron Circle suspects, a roster dating back to the creation of the NCS, a project she had taken over when nobody else wanted the smoke. The original director, retired General Ruth Holloway, had warned her when handing over the key. This thing runs deeper than you're ready for. Don't open that drawer unless you plan to drain the swamp to the bottom. Now the swamp had struck first, and they weren't hiding anymore. Jordan turned to Marshall. What about the Shadow Vault? Marshall nearly swerved into the shoulder. You can't be serious. I'm dead serious. He shook his head. That's black bag territory. Not even DHS has clearance for that anymore. Jordan's voice dropped. Which is exactly why they won't expect me to use it. The Shadow Vault was an unofficial name for an off-grid archive hidden in a decommissioned FEMA facility in West Virginia. It was built during the Cold War, retrofitted in the early 2000s, and then buried in red tape so deep that even most senators didn't know it still existed. But Jordan knew. Ruth had taken her there once. If you ever lose everything, Ruth had said, go here. It's the only place they haven't touched. Yet, Marshall glanced at her, concern all over his face. You're going nuclear. No, Jordan said. They went nuclear. I'm just turning the lights back on. Back in D.C., Tasha was already pulling her own strings. She'd locked herself in Jordan's private briefing suite and had 3 laptops running simultaneously. One tracked DHS communications. One pinged activity across law enforcement databases. The third, her personal laptop, was searching social media, watching trends. And that's where she found it. A hashtag. Just one, but it was catching fire. Hashtag Protect Jordan Miles. At first, it was a tweet from a black law student. They mocked her in court. They tried to erase her. We see you, Jordan Miles. We've got your back. Hashtag Protect Jordan Miles. Then a teacher added, my students watched that courtroom clip. They were inspired. They were furious. They started researching civil rights law on their lunch break. That's leadership. Hashtag Protect Jordan Miles. Tasha's eyes widened. Within an hour, the hashtag was trending top 5 in the country. The story had shifted. Jordan wasn't just a director anymore. She was a symbol, a threat to those who thrived in the dark. Back in the Camry, Jordan's phone buzzed again. But this time, it wasn't from a blocked number. It was from Ruth Holloway herself. Her message was short. You know where the back door is. Take the Southern Pass. I left a code in the lighthouse. Jordan smiled faintly. Ruth always did have a dramatic way of saying things. But Jordan understood. The lighthouse was an old ranger station near the FEMA site. The code would be written somewhere only someone who knew Ruth's methods would understand, likely stashed under an old Bible or inside a false drawer. Marshall veered onto the interstate. They had a long drive ahead, and while they drove, the storm grew behind them. Because while Jordan was retreating, the Iron Circle was advancing. Tasha received a ping on her DHS terminal. 2 more civil rights attorneys had been suspended pending investigation. False charges. Anonymous complaints. The pattern was clear. Anyone tied to Jordan, anyone on her side, was now a target. She grabbed her phone and dialed Jordan. No answer. She tried again. Still no response. She leaned back, jaw tight. Then the lights in the suite flickered. She looked up. It was a secure government facility. Lights should never flicker. Not here. Tasha's instincts screamed. She unplugged her hard drives and started backing everything up to a cold external she kept just for emergencies. While it loaded, she heard a sound outside the door, a click, like someone unlocking it with a key. She grabbed her pepper spray from her purse and stood, heart pounding. The door opened. It wasn't a federal officer. It was a janitor, but his eyes locked on her laptop screens. He wasn't holding a mop. He was holding a tiny USB stick. He looked up at her and smiled. Director Miles isn't going to make it. But you're smart. You can walk away right now and keep breathing. Tasha stared at him. And then, before he could blink, she sprayed him right in the face. He screamed, stumbled back, dropping the USB. Tasha kicked the door shut, yanked the Ethernet cable from all 3 laptops, shoved her backup drive into her purse, and bolted for the side exit. She ran through the back stairwell, dodged down 2 flights, and burst out into the rear parking lot. Her car was parked at the far end. She ran like her life depended on it. Because now, it did. Back on the road, Jordan and Marshall reached the foothills outside the FEMA site. It was nightfall now. Stars above. Silence all around. They found the lighthouse, an old park ranger cabin, and broke the lock. Inside, under a floorboard, was a metal tin with a strip of paper inside. Holloway Protocol, Vault 7, Execute Code, Sentinel Rising. Marshall read it aloud. What's Sentinel Rising? Jordan smiled. It's our failsafe. Ruth left one last trapdoor in the system. If we input that code into the Shadow Vault, we unlock everything. Every redacted report. Every sealed name. Even files Congress buried. Marshall stared. But that'll blow the whole thing up. National news. Federal hearings. People going to prison. Jordan's smile faded into something colder. That's the plan. But before they could leave the cabin, Jordan's burner buzzed again. This time a photo of Tasha. Her face bloody, eyes swollen. Caption with 5 words. Next move is up to you. Jordan's knees buckled. Marshall caught her. She stared at the photo, fury building inside her like a furnace. They had crossed the line. Now it was more than a war. It was personal. She looked up at Marshall, eyes burning. We're not waiting for the right moment anymore. He nodded. Then what now? Jordan stood, steadying herself. She held up the key. Now, we open the vault. The night air was cold and bitter in the West Virginia hills, but Jordan's blood was burning. She held the brass key tightly in her palm, its weight like a promise she'd been waiting years to fulfill. The photo of Tasha, the blood, the bruises, was still fresh in her mind, carved into her memory like a scar. Jordan stood at the edge of the old FEMA facility, a forgotten fortress camouflaged by time and trees. Rusted fencing, dead power lines. No guards, no signs, just a gravel path and the memory of secrets buried deep beneath the earth. Marshall stood beside her, flashlight in one hand, the other gripping a pistol tucked under his coat. This place gives me chills, he muttered. Jordan didn't respond. She walked straight toward the rusted steel doors, down the small slope leading to the underground entrance. The keypad on the wall was ancient, probably hadn't been touched in years, but when she slid the key into the analog slot just beneath it, a soft click echoed. The door creaked open an inch, then another, and then silence. Jordan turned to Marshall. You sure you want to go in? He nodded once. You go, I go. She pushed the door open fully, and they slipped inside. The air in the shadow vault was different. Still, heavy, like the air in a church that had been locked for centuries. Their footsteps echoed down the narrow corridor, lit only by the weak beam of Marshall's flashlight. The walls were lined with metal cabinets, file drawers, and data racks covered in dust. A layer of silence coated everything like a second skin. Jordan moved with purpose, turning at the third hallway and walking to the back wall where a black panel waited. She reached into her coat and pulled out the paper she'd found in the ranger's cabin. Sentinel Rising. That was the code. She typed it into the cracked keyboard beneath the panel. The wall vibrated softly. Then, click. A door-sized file cabinet slid outward, revealing a hidden chamber lined with red folders. Each one stamped. Confidential. Authorized access only. Jordan grabbed the first one. She flipped it open. The first name nearly knocked the breath from her lungs. Judge Peter Haywood, Richmond Circuit Court. He had presided over dozens of racially charged cases, dismissing most of them for insufficient evidence. The next folder? Lieutenant George Kendrick, head of internal affairs for 3 precincts, known for disappearing complaints. The next? Senator Clyde R. Maddox. Jordan stopped. Marshall leaned in. He's a sitting senator. Yup. And he was one of the co-founders of the National Civil Security Initiative back in the day. Jordan's eyes narrowed. He helped build the watchdog, while also feeding the wolf. Each name came with dates, events, silent payouts, even transcripts. Hundreds of pages. All connected. Jordan stepped back, overwhelmed by the scale of it. This isn't just a group, she whispered. It's a machine. They've been operating under different names for decades. Iron Circle is just their latest face. Marshall was already snapping pictures with his burner phone. This is enough to bring down half of Capitol Hill. Jordan turned sharply. Then we do it. We leak it all. Marshall looked uncertain. You sure we can trust the media? No, she said. But we can trust the people. She pulled her own backup drive from her coat. She'd brought it for this moment. The chamber had an old data port, just compatible enough. She started uploading everything. It would take 15 minutes. But at the 7-minute mark, the lights cut out. Total darkness. Marshall cursed. They found us. Jordan ripped the drive out. We have enough. Let's move. They sprinted back down the corridor, guided only by the flashlight. But as they reached the exit tunnel, Jordan froze. The steel door they had entered through? Closed. From the outside. They were locked in. She ran to the control panel, pounded it. No power. No key override. Someone's jamming it remotely, she said. Marshall pointed. Ventilation shaft. We can climb it. Jordan looked up. Barely wide enough for one person. But it was their only shot. Marshall boosted her first. She climbed, hands scraping against the rough metal. Above her, through the slits in the shaft, she saw movement. Flashlights. Shadows. They're on the roof, she whispered. As she climbed, she pulled out her phone and sent a voice note to Tasha, praying she was still alive to receive it. We got the files. I'm locked in. If I don't make it out, you leak them. Folders marked, Sentinel Rising. You know what to do. At the top of the shaft, a rusty grate blocked her exit. She pushed once. It didn't budge. Twice. Still nothing. Below her, Marshall was climbing fast. She braced her feet against the shaft walls, took a breath, and kicked the grate as hard as she could. Bang! It flew open. She pulled herself up and out, emerging into the woods behind the facility, coughing and gasping. Marshall climbed out seconds later. They lay there for a moment, breathing hard, staring at the stars above. Then, a voice from the trees. Well, we thought we snuffed your little flame. They looked up. For men in black tactical gear stood just 20 feet away, weapons pointed at them. One of them was Curtis Langston, the leak from inside DHS. You went and dug where you weren't supposed to, Director, he said, voice slick with arrogance. Now you have to disappear. Jordan slowly stood, hands raised. I've got a better idea. From her coat, she clicked a button on her backup drive, one she had programmed just in case. It activated a remote upload. Files began streaming straight to a private whistleblower network. Tasha had the encryption keys. Curtis frowned. Then his radio crackled. Sir, the files, they're going public. We're seeing them pop up everywhere. Curtis turned back to Jordan, rage twisting his face. What did you do? Jordan stepped forward. What you were too stupid to see. I made you famous. Suddenly, the forest around them lit up, spotlights. From every angle, federal vehicles rolled in. Homeland Security. U.S. Marshals. FBI. Jordan turned to Marshall. I called in every favor I had. Curtis tried to run. He got maybe 3 steps before he was tackled. Jordan walked past his crumpled form, heart thudding, body aching. But her voice? Steady as stone. You should have left me in that courtroom. Sirens wailed. Agents swarmed. The woods lit up like a battlefield. And in the distance, Jordan's phone buzzed. A message from Tasha. I leaked everything. They're calling it the biggest civil corruption bust in U.S. history. And I'm okay. I'm safe. Jordan closed her eyes, then opened them, and walked forward into the light. The federal lights bathed the forest in blue and white, painting every tree like a spotlight on justice. Jordan walked forward slowly, each step heavy with purpose, like she was stepping out of the shadows and into history. Curtis Langston was on the ground, zip-tied and cursing. Federal agents hauled him to his feet, reading him his rights as he spat threats he no longer had the power to keep. You don't get it, he shouted, his face twisted with panic. I'm not the top. I'm not even close. You don't know who you're dealing with. Jordan stopped and turned to him, her face calm. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, she said quietly. People who think power makes them untouchable. People who've never been told no by someone who looked like me. Curtis glared at her, eyes wild. You can't stop it. You think this ends with me? Iron Circle is bigger than you think. You can't kill the root. Jordan took a step closer and looked him straight in the eye. Then I'll burn the whole forest. The agents dragged him away. Marshall stood beside her, watching the chaos unfold. Helicopters were arriving now. More agents. News cameras from miles away had picked up the sirens and were closing in. The leak Tasha had pushed out was detonating across every major outlet in the country. CNN. Breaking. Massive civil corruption network exposed, led by law enforcement and elected officials. MSNBC. Whistleblower documents tie sitting judges, senators to systemic misconduct. Director Jordan Miles at the center of it all. Fox News. Chaos in the courts? DHS division head at heart of explosive leak. Jordan's name was everywhere, and so was her face. But she didn't smile. Not yet. Because this wasn't over. Back in D.C., Tasha sat in a secure building under U.S. Marshal protection. Her face was still bruised, her right eye swollen, but her hands moved fast over the keyboard as she continued coordinating the release of documents. A team of trusted cybersecurity experts, friends from college, colleagues from previous campaigns, had rallied behind her. They were working around the clock, decrypting and releasing only what wouldn't compromise active federal investigations. Jordan had insisted on that. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about exposure. Drop another name, Tasha instructed. We go slow. Strategic. Keep the public hungry but the legal system working. A woman on her team nodded. We just dropped Judge Haywood's communications with Senator Maddox. It's already on 4 outlets. Tasha smirked through the pain. Good. Let the public see what justice looks like when it wears no mask. Meanwhile, inside a private government bunker outside of Richmond, Jordan sat at a secure table with a federal task force. Agents from the FBI, DOJ, and DHS were packed into the room. Some of them looked nervous. Others just looked tired. We now believe Iron Circle has nodes in 8 states, one agent said, pointing at a map, primarily concentrated in judicial, corrections, and internal affairs. They operate in cells, small groups that act independently but answer to a central communications hub. Jordan nodded. Find the hub. We're working on it. The leak destabilized them. They're scrambling. Jordan leaned forward. This is our shot. If we hit them fast and together, we don't just slow them down. We end them. One agent raised his hand. Director Miles, with all due respect, how do we know the leak didn't expose us? If they retaliate. Jordan cut him off. They already are retaliating. They attacked my staff. Tried to kill me. Bombed a federal vault. What we're doing right now, that is the retaliation. Silence filled the room. Then a voice from the back. It was the Attorney General himself. He stood slowly. For the record, Director Miles, this task force is now under your operational command. All heads turned to her. Jordan blinked. Excuse me. You've earned it, he said. And frankly, no one knows this network better than you. You built this department. You took it into the fire. Now you're going to lead us out. Jordan didn't speak for a moment. Not because she was unsure, but because the weight of the moment finally hit her. They had mocked her. They had tried to silence her. They had underestimated her. And now, they were following her. The next 2 weeks moved like lightning. More names were exposed. More arrests. More resignations. 2 state governors announced emergency reviews of their judicial appointments. One police chief was indicted. A prominent senator, the same one who had tried to gut the civil security budget a year ago, was caught red-handed in an email thread with Langston. Jordan worked around the clock. But for the first time, she wasn't doing it alone. She had allies now. Real ones. People who had seen the footage, heard the recordings, watched her walk calmly into that courtroom and get mocked like she was nothing, only to rise and reveal she was everything they feared. And now, even the president had called. She didn't take the call at first. Not because she was trying to be rude, but because she was busy in the field, reviewing files, helping with arrests, checking on the safety of families affected by the abuse. She was working like the nation had handed her its pain and asked her to heal it. Only when she finally took a moment to breathe, sitting on the hood of a federal vehicle outside a courthouse in Alabama, did she return the call. The president's voice was calm, warm. Director Miles, I wanted to say thank you. Not just as commander-in-chief, but as an American. Jordan nodded. You don't have to thank me. Just don't let it happen again. There was a pause. Then a chuckle. Fair enough. Back in Richmond, a public mural had gone up overnight, painted across the side of the courthouse. A tall, proud black woman in a gray blazer, standing calmly in front of a roaring storm, her eyes locked forward. At the bottom, painted in gold, she walked in quiet and shook the nation. Jordan didn't know about the mural until someone tagged her in it online. When she saw it, she just stared, not out of pride, out of resolve. This wasn't over yet. There was one last file she hadn't released. The deepest name, the one at the root. Because even the Iron Circle had a crown. And Jordan knew who wore it. But she had to wait. Had to be sure. So for now, she gathered her strength. And watched the world shift around her. And just when things seemed like they were finally settling, Tasha called her. Jordan, she said, her voice low, shaky. There's a new leak. Jordan sat up straight. What is it? It's not about them, Tasha whispered. It's about you. Jordan's heart skipped. What are you talking about? Tasha took a breath. It's a video. From your past. Before you ever joined civil security. Someone's trying to use it to destroy your credibility. Jordan went silent. Tasha continued. It's bad, Jordan. And they just dropped it. Jordan's phone screen glowed in the dark as the download bar crept slowly across it. Tasha's voice buzzed in her ear. They're trying to flip the script. Make you the villain in your own story. What's in the video? Jordan asked, her voice tight. It's from college. Grainy footage. You're in a hoodie, arguing with a campus cop. The footage makes it look like you were resisting arrest. Jordan exhaled, slow and cold. She remembered that day like a bullet in her mind. She'd been 19. A security guard had followed her through the student union, accusing her of stealing a laptop bag that belonged to her. When she refused to stop for questioning and demanded he call his supervisor, he tried to detain her. She pushed back, and in that moment, click, someone's phone camera caught it. It was a scene that could easily be taken out of context. And now it had been. Jordan tapped her screen. The video opened. She watched her 19-year-old self standing tall, voice firm, surrounded by tension. She was pointing at the cop, saying something, but the audio had been stripped. In its place, someone had added a voiceover. She has a history of aggressive behavior. Can she really be trusted to oversee the nation's civil security? Jordan clenched her jaw. They weren't fighting fair anymore. They were trying to unravel her reputation, thread by thread. And worse, they were targeting her truth. Marshall was the first to call after the leak went viral. "You want to make a statement?" he asked. "No," she said. "Jordan, it's blowing up. They're already calling for your resignation. If you don't get ahead of it." "I said no," Jordan repeated. "If I speak now, I look defensive. I look afraid. I want the truth to hit harder than their edits." She hung up and stood in her small safe house office, staring at her reflection in the window. That video, it was a wound reopened. Not just for her, but for every black woman who had ever had to choose between standing up and being labeled angry, or staying silent and being stepped on. She wouldn't run from it. She'd walk through it. But first, she needed the full version of the footage, the real one. The one the world hadn't seen. Tasha was already ahead of her. "I've been digging through campus archives," she said, typing furiously at her computer. They didn't realize the university had security cameras facing the other angle of that incident. "Please tell me you got it," Jordan said, hope flickering. "I got it." Within minutes, she sent the full video. Jordan watched it, this time with everything intact, her voice, her words, and the truth. The footage showed her calmly explaining that the bag was hers. The security guard growing agitated. Her asking for a supervisor. Him grabbing her arm. And only then did she push back. The difference was clear. One video made her look like a threat. The real one showed she was being threatened. Jordan called her communications director. "Prepare a press briefing," she said. "We release the truth ourselves. Should we coordinate with the White House response team?" "No," Jordan replied. "I don't need a defense squad. I need a mic." An hour later, the nation watched as Jordan Miles stepped onto a podium in front of the press. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, no flair, just a plain gray suit, a single folder in her hand. She looked out at the dozens of cameras, the crowd of reporters, the live streams beaming her face into homes, phones, and hearts across the country. She began simply. "Some of you have seen a video of me at 19 years old. Let me tell you the story behind it." She told it. Raw, unfiltered. She didn't defend herself. She explained herself. She didn't shrink. She expanded. She spoke about what it meant to grow up black and female in systems designed to label you before you speak. She explained how that moment shaped her, not because it was an exception, but because it was common, and she wasn't going to be ashamed of surviving it. She played the full video on screen for the world to see. Then she leaned into the mic. "Now that you've seen who I was, let me remind you of who I am." A montage played on the screen behind her. Brief clips of her court reforms, her community work, her leadership during the Iron Circle investigation, her battle to protect citizens like Kiera Thompson. Then she spoke again. "My name is Jordan Miles. I lead the National Civil Security Department, and I will not be stepping down." The crowd erupted. Some reporters stood and applauded, something rarely done in a press room. And just like that, the tide shifted again. Online, the hashtag changed. Hashtag #StandWithJordan. Celebrities spoke out in her defense. Kiera Thompson went live, in tears, thanking Jordan for giving her back her dignity. Even a group of retired federal judges signed a letter praising her leadership under fire. But in the shadows, Iron Circle wasn't done. The roots were being ripped up, yes. But deep underground, a new directive was sent. She cannot reach the root. Inside an undisclosed location, a man opened a steel door. Behind it, files older than Jordan herself. Folders marked with names from decades ago. At the very bottom, one man's name. Director, Miles. Senior. A picture attached. Jordan's father. The same father who had died when she was 15. The man whispered into his headset. She doesn't know. A voice responded. Then make sure she never finds out. Back in D.C., Tasha was waiting for Jordan in her private office. When Jordan walked in, Tasha had that look again, the same one she'd had when she first found out about the leak. There's something else, Tasha said quietly. Jordan stopped. What now? Tasha turned her laptop around. On the screen was a sealed federal record, decrypted. The file's title, Operation Ember Vale. And beneath it, a signature, Professor Leonard Miles. Jordan stared at the name. Her father's name. Tasha whispered. Jordan, your dad worked in covert operations. He was part of the original civil defense programs. And according to this, he helped design the first generation of the systems Iron Circle corrupted. Jordan's heart thundered in her chest. Her voice cracked. He never told me. He couldn't, Tasha said. It was sealed. And then she pointed to the next line of the file. He died protecting the integrity of the system from internal threats. Jordan's eyes filled with tears. She had been fighting a system for years, not knowing her own father had been one of the first to fight it. And now, the very people he once battled were trying to erase her too. Jordan stood slowly, and for the first time since the courtroom incident, her voice trembled. Not in fear, but in fire. This isn't just about me anymore. Tasha looked at her. What are you going to do? Jordan looked at the screen, then out the window at the Capitol, then back at the camera pointed at her desk. She flipped the switch, went live. I have a story to finish, she said, and a family legacy to honor. The live stream blinked on. No production, no filters, just Jordan, sitting at her desk, the golden light of DC twilight casting long shadows across her face. Her voice, as it came through millions of screens across the country, was low, controlled, but every word carried weight, like it had been hammered in fire. I want to talk to you about something personal. The comments section lit up instantly. She's back. Director Miles is live. Turn this up. Jordan continued. For the last few weeks, we've been uncovering a conspiracy, one that reaches into courtrooms, police stations, politics. A group that called itself the Iron Circle. She paused. You know that part already. But what you don't know is this. I wasn't the first person in my family to fight them. She reached off-screen and held up the printed file from Tasha's decrypted drive. It was slightly wrinkled at the edges, marked with the government's bold confidential stamp. This document, buried in a vault meant to never see daylight, holds the name of the man who started this fight. Professor Leonard Miles. My father. She didn't cry. She didn't even blink. Most people knew him as a teacher, a quiet man, a father. But buried beneath his lectures and papers, he helped design early civil defense programs, systems meant to protect everyday people from abuse of power, systems that were later corrupted. She leaned forward. According to this file, my father died protecting those systems from people inside the government, people who wanted to weaponize them, people who would become what we now call the Iron Circle. A deep silence fell over the internet. Phones buzzed across the nation. Cable anchors stopped mid-sentence. And for the first time since the courtroom incident, nobody questioned Jordan's place. They were finally listening. Jordan's voice lowered, but somehow grew sharper. I didn't know this when I walked into that courtroom. I didn't know when they laughed at me, when they tried to erase me, that I was already walking in my father's footsteps. She exhaled. But I know now. She looked directly into the lens. So here's my promise to you, and to him. The camera zoomed just slightly as she raised the file. I will finish what he started. By midnight, her speech was on every network. The hashtag #LegacyUnbroken trended worldwide. People began printing her father's name onto protest signs. Leonard Miles, the first fighter. His daughter is coming. But in the shadows, Iron Circle was unraveling. The exposure had triggered full-blown collapse. One of the founding members was found fleeing the country under a fake passport. Another tried to delete his digital trail, only to be caught on a private airstrip in Utah. Senator Maddox resigned live on national television, blaming political hysteria, but the smirk on his face was gone. Yet the head, the true leader, was still unknown, still protected, still hiding behind proxies and buried files. Until one broke loose. 2 days later, a small package arrived at Jordan's office. Unmarked. Inside, a flash drive. No note. No return address. Just a label written in permanent marker. From someone who believed in your father. Tasha ran every scan. No virus, no trackers, no digital traps. They opened it. One folder. Inside, a single video file titled The Root. They hit play. A grainy video filled the screen. The footage looked decades old, like it had been recorded on old government surveillance equipment. It showed a conference room. 5 men. 1 woman. Jordan leaned closer. The man at the head of the table was facing away from the camera, but his voice was unmistakable. Confident. Calculated. Iron Circle is not just a group, he said. It's an operating principle. Power must be preserved by those who understand it best. Then the man turned, and Jordan gasped. It was Judge Lucien Barron, a retired federal judge, a beloved civil rights-era figure, the kind of man who had marched with Martin Luther King Jr., had held office for 30 years, and had never been questioned. He was a national treasure, untouchable. Jordan shook her head. It can't be. But it was. The video continued. Judge Barron looked directly into the lens. I knew Leonard was getting too close. That idealism, it's always dangerous. And then, chillingly, we'll make his death look clean. Jordan's stomach turned. Her father's accident. The car crash. It had never been an accident. The screen went black. Tasha turned slowly. Jordan, he ordered the hit. Jordan stood up, paced, then stopped. We go public. Are you sure? He's a national icon. If we mess this up, Jordan's eyes blazed. Then we take the heat. But we tell the truth. The next morning, Jordan held a press conference. But not from behind a podium. Not from an official press room. She stood in the exact same courtroom where it all began. The courtroom where they had mocked her. Where the officers had laughed. Where the world had first learned her name. Now, it was packed wall to wall with reporters. She stood at the front, holding the flash drive. This courtroom once tried to silence me. She looked around. But now, it will help me speak. She plugged the flash drive into a screen, and the video of Judge Barron began to play. People gasped. Reporters grabbed their phones. And as the final words played, we'll make his death look clean, a firestorm ignited. That night, protests lit up the country. Not in rage, but in solidarity. They carried signs with Jordan's face on one side, and her father's on the other. And beneath them both, they tried to bury us. We grew back roots. Back in her office, Jordan stood by the window as the city lights blinked below her. Marshall stepped beside her. You did it, he said. Jordan shook her head. We started it. He smiled. You know what I mean. She turned to him. We still have to rebuild. Reform. Investigate everyone who let this go on. And you're ready for that? She looked out the window again. At the murals. The people. The legacy. And whispered. I was born for it. The Capitol dome shimmered under the morning sun, but beneath its glow, the air was thick with unrest and renewal. Inside the walls of Congress, the air was charged with a tension the nation hadn't felt in decades. Senators shuffled nervously behind chamber doors. Lobbyists scrambled to rewrite talking points. News anchors stood outside with mics in hand, broadcasting nonstop coverage of what was now being called the Miles Doctrine. After the exposure of Judge Lucien Barron, the so-called people's judge turned puppet master of the Iron Circle, Jordan Miles wasn't just a name anymore. She was a movement, a face of power that didn't bend, a voice that wouldn't stay quiet, a woman who refused to shrink, even when the highest seats in the land tried to cast her into shadow. And now, they were summoning her. The Senate Oversight Committee had formally requested her presence for testimony regarding the Iron Circle, the security leaks, the federal leaks, and the death of her father. But Jordan didn't flinch. She walked through the doors of that marble-lined chamber in silence, dressed in all black, her hair braided tight, her back straight as steel. The room buzzed. Even the senators couldn't hide their curiosity. Some looked smug, others intimidated. A few tried to keep their eyes down, but even they were waiting to see how this woman, this director, this black woman, would hold her ground under fire. The chairwoman cleared her throat. Director Miles, you are here today to answer questions regarding the recent exposure of confidential intelligence, the accusations against Judge Lucien Barron, and your department's involvement in a civilian-led leak of classified materials. Do you understand? Jordan leaned into the mic. I understand. Some have questioned your methods, Director. Unorthodox. Reckless. Dangerous. Jordan blinked. Saving democracy isn't a tidy job, Senator, but it's still worth doing. A ripple of reaction moved through the chamber. A younger senator, a progressive voice from Minnesota, spoke next. Director Miles, in your opinion, how deep does this network go? How many more may be hiding in positions of power? Jordan didn't hesitate. We're still investigating, but the initial estimates suggest a minimum of 64 individuals across 8 states. Judges, police chiefs, DAs, even campaign donors who funneled influence through back channels. It's not a leak, it's a rot. Another senator leaned forward. Are you suggesting our entire justice system is compromised? Jordan looked him square in the eyes. I'm saying parts of it were built that way. Silence. Not a single cough. Not a whisper. Only the sound of truth ringing in a room that wasn't ready for it. The chairwoman finally sighed. Director, if you could go back, if you could stop the release of the files, spare yourself the risk, would you? Jordan stared at her and smiled. No. And then she reached into the folder in front of her, pulled out a copy of the declassified Ember Vale file. My father gave his life trying to protect this country from enemies within. His death was covered up by the same people who tried to erase my name a few weeks ago. I didn't just leak information. I revealed truth. She slid the file across the desk and stood. I will not apologize for honoring the legacy of someone who chose courage over comfort. The room fell into a hush so deep, it felt like time itself was holding its breath. Then, applause. From the back of the chamber. A single clap. Then 2. Then the sound grew. Reporters. Staffers. Even a senator or 2. Jordan gave a single nod, then exited the chamber, her heels echoing like thunder on the marble floor. Outside, the crowd was waiting. Hundreds had gathered. Some held signs. Some held cell phones. All of them stood in reverent silence as she stepped down the Capitol steps. Tasha was waiting at the bottom. Her face still carried faint scars, but her spirit? Untouched. Jordan walked toward her. Tasha held up her phone. You should see this. Jordan took the phone. A breaking news alert flashed across the screen. White House proposes sweeping Judicial Integrity Act, citing Director Miles' leadership. Below it, another headline. FBI forms permanent task force on internal corruption, names Director Miles as strategic advisor. Jordan handed the phone back and smiled, not a proud smile, a ready smile, like someone who knew more was coming. We've shaken the tree, she said. Yeah, Tasha replied. But the snakes are still falling. That night, back in her office, Jordan sat quietly, staring out the window at the city lights. In her hand was the last unopened letter her father had ever written. It had arrived a week before his death, back when she was still in high school. She had never read it. Not until now. Her hands trembled slightly as she tore it open. Inside, in his familiar handwriting, Jordan, you are going to grow into a world that might not want to see you rise. That's how systems work. They pretend they're fair until someone like you proves they're not. But I want you to remember something. You don't have to be loud to be heard. You don't have to be liked to be right. And when the storm comes, don't run from it. Walk straight into it. Because you, baby girl, are the storm. Jordan's eyes burned. But she didn't cry. She folded the letter, tucked it into her desk drawer, and picked up her phone. Tasha answered instantly. Yeah. Schedule a meeting, Jordan said. First thing tomorrow. With who? Jordan's voice was clear. The survivors. The people this system failed. And then, Jordan leaned back in her chair. Then we rebuild it. Brick by brick. A beat passed. Then Tasha whispered, It's happening, huh? Jordan nodded to herself. It's starting. But just before she could hang up, an alert flashed across her phone. Unidentified leak. New file drop on Darknet. Subject, Iron Circle, Phoenix Protocol. Her eyes narrowed. She tapped. Opened the file. Inside was a name she hadn't seen before. Unit Leader, Project Phoenix. Active Asset, Senator Jonathan Deal. Jordan stared. A senator still in power. One who had voted in favor of the very reforms she was fighting for. On the surface, he was clean, supportive. But in the shadows, he was still playing both sides. Jordan stood, the fire back in her chest. They weren't done. The Iron Circle wasn't gone. It had morphed. And now, it had a new name. The word Phoenix blinked on Jordan's screen like a flare in the dark. She stood motionless, reading it again. Not just a name, a resurrection. The Iron Circle hadn't died. It had evolved. Phoenix Protocol wasn't just a backup plan. It was a continuation, a second head of the same monster. Jordan stared at the name beneath it. Senator Jonathan Deal. The same senator who had stood behind her at press conferences, who had shaken her hand, praised her reforms, voted for the Civil Security Restoration Act. A man with a flawless public image, a face on Sunday news shows, and a reputation as a bridge builder. A bridge, she now realized, between justice and corruption. She didn't call Tasha this time. She drove, alone, to the senator's private estate just outside Alexandria, past the gates, past the press vans, straight to the front door. She didn't knock. She walked in. His assistant tried to stop her. Director Miles, he's not expecting. Jordan raised a single hand, and the woman stepped aside without another word. She found Senator Deal in his study. He stood from his leather chair, surprised, then smiled in that rehearsed, politician kind of way. Director Miles. What a surprise. I was just reviewing some of the task force proposals. I must say you've sparked. She tossed the file onto his desk. The smile died on his face. He stared at the word Phoenix, then up at her. She didn't blink. I know who you are, she said. He sank slowly back into the chair. That's a dangerous accusation. It's not an accusation, she said, stepping forward. It's a confirmed truth. You can either cooperate, or you can burn. Deal's mask cracked. His voice dropped an octave. I helped you, Jordan. Push through reforms no one else would touch. And behind the curtain, she snapped. You ran ops, funded networks, blocked investigations with fake bipartisan reviews. You handed me a microphone with one hand and a noose with the other. Deal sighed, eyes cold. You're smart, but you still don't understand how this country works. No, Jordan said. You don't understand how it has to work now. He stood, slowly, tall, calm, dangerous. You can't arrest me. I'm insulated. 5 levels deep. You bring me down, half the Capitol burns with me. Jordan took out her phone and tapped a button. A hidden camera lit up from inside his study. The live stream had been going for 5 minutes. The nation was watching. Deal blinked. She smiled, just a little. I don't have to arrest you, she said. All I have to do is let you talk. Deal lunged for the phone. Jordan stepped back as agents burst through the front door. FBI, DHS, U.S. Marshals. Senator Jonathan Deal was restrained in seconds. As they let him out, he passed Jordan, eyes burning. You won't survive this. She leaned in close. You said that the first time. He was dragged away. And for the first time since this all began, Jordan exhaled. Not relief, but release. 3 months later, the courtroom in D.C. was filled, not with cameras or chaos, but with civilians. People like Kiera Thompson. Parents. Students. Former inmates. Everyday Americans who had lived through the failings of a broken system. Jordan stood at the podium of the very first People's Civil Rights Review Board, now signed into law. Tasha sat at her right, Marshall on her left. Her father's letter, You Are the Storm, framed on the wall behind them. Jordan smiled at the audience. 3 months ago, she said, I stood here as a witness to corruption. She paused, eyes sweeping the room. Today, I stand here as a builder of something better. The room erupted in applause. Children stood to clap. An older woman shouted, Thank you, baby. Outside, the murals had grown. Now, Jordan's father stood beside her in paint, holding a book in one hand and a shield in the other. Across the bricks in bold white, they tried to erase her. Instead, she wrote history. That night, in her home, her real home, finally safe, Jordan curled up with a cup of tea and watched the sun set over the Capitol. Tasha sat beside her on the couch. You really did it. Jordan smiled softly. No, we did it. A moment passed. Tasha leaned her head on her shoulder. I'm just glad they saw you. Jordan looked out the window and whispered, They saw us. In every city, signs had gone up. Jordan Miles Way. Civil security begins with truth. And in classrooms, little black girls wrote essays about the woman who stood tall, stayed calm, and burned down corruption with quiet fire. The woman they laughed at. The woman they mocked. The woman they thought was just another face in a crowd. And the woman who became a legacy.